Hi, I'm Nigel Baker, and you're listening to The Future Financial Advisor. We're running this podcast to create an avenue for advisors to share their thoughts and their best interests, and really trying to attract those advisors who want to take the industry forward. What we want is great businesses who are really making a difference and really making a big impact to their clients, and we want to know how they're doing it. So in this series, we're going to be discussing the latest digital platforms, some best practices, evidence-based investing strategies. We want to give financial advisors the tools they need to help more investors improve their financial well-being. So if you're ready to take the industry forward, modernise your advisory practice and reach a new generation of investors and the new generation of advisors, then this show is for you.
So all our recordings and podcasts are general advice. All the content, all the people interviewing here, it's all their own opinions and all their own views. In no way does it constitute any personal advice or recommendations. If you need specific advice, please go and seek an advisor. Thanks very much.
Hi, and welcome to today's podcast. Today we've got our advisors from the team here, Josh Smythe and Nick Andrews, and they're going to explain and talk about their experiences as new advisors in the industry and what they've experienced for the last couple of years. They came into the industry just as COVID started. They went into lockdown, markets tumbled 30% straight away, then they came back. They came back into the office, started meeting lots of clients, and now they're having to meet clients and explain the last couple of years, and then seeing not just equities fall, but bonds fall, and a really tough year in markets, one of the toughest years we've seen in a long time. So I thought it'd be really fascinating for advisors and of all ages, but particularly maybe some younger advisors to listen into Josh and Nick as they really openly share their thoughts over the last year or two, and also explain the philosophy and how perhaps they challenged that and thought about that over the last period, and what they've learned, what worked from a communication point of view, perhaps what didn't. And yeah, I think, again, it's a really interesting conversation. They answer it very honestly. I think you'll enjoy it. Please make sure you ask any questions, like our podcast for us, that'd be great, and reach out to us on our contacts. Hope you enjoy. Cheers.
Hi everyone, welcome to today's podcast. I'm really excited today to have Josh and Nick from the team on here today for today's podcast. How are you guys?
Good, thanks, Nigel.
Yeah, well, thanks, Nigel. How are you?
You're good? Yeah, good. Hope you're excited to be interviewed. So a lot's been going on this year, and today I particularly want to talk about the journey that we've had this year from the start of the year to the finish and what's been going on in markets. And really what I want for you to share is your experience being, relatively new. You've been in the industry a couple of years now, and how you found that as a coming into the industry, how you found the experience talking to clients about it, if you had any concerns throughout it, if you totally lost faith in the philosophy midway through and thought this is rubbish, let's get out of here. Obviously markets are going to stay down or we're in the wrong thing. So yeah, so that's a point of today, and I hope that's helpful for clients who watch this or other advisors or whoever else. And I think your insight. So just a conversation, but I thought I'd open up just with a question and say, you've been in the industry a couple of years. How did you find this year? How did you, looking back now, what's the experience been like?
Yeah, it's quite interesting because we sort of entered the industry, June 2020, and we saw that's really when the market started to pick up after the steep declines of COVID in March. So, we entered the industry where we've got these, ridiculous gains in the market, and then we've sort of come into this sort of year where it's the complete opposite, and we're seeing these massive declines. So, in client meetings, it was quite easy at the start of our journey. Everyone was super happy because performance was great. The market sort of took care of that by itself. But now we're in this different situation where, markets aren't doing so well, and you've really had to switch into gear and, use all that knowledge that we have accumulated over the last couple of years and put it into practice. So it's been interesting, but I think we've seen the highs and the lows in only a short couple of years. So I think it's going to serve us well moving forward.
You've seen it all. Massive volatility in a few years. And a good experience. Good experience to get through a tough year as well. The good years are, in a way, easier, but they're challenging in their own right. But when you have to face a client who's looking at a -7, -8, -9%, and in dollar terms that can be a couple $100,000, it's not an easy conversation.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, Nigel, because not that we were preparing for this podcast, but we were having a conversation before we started today. And that's exactly it. Obviously, it's much easier to have a conversation with a client when they're up 7% as opposed to down. But I actually found one of the sort of parts of this year was sort of placing more emphasis on the material that you bring to those meetings. And that's something that we spoke about earlier, Josh, about how much we've prepared some slide decks and sort of tried to gather sort of different various pieces of data that will try and provide comfort to clients in these situations. And not to say those conversations are easier. Some of them have been quite difficult, but it's just because of that emphasis there. Some of those conversations is not to say more prepared, but almost like we've had more material to work with.
And were you surprised, or how clients responded? Or did you go into some of those meetings and come out of it and go, "Oh, that was a bit different to how I thought it might go"? Like, tell me about some of those thoughts, I suppose, those feelings before you went into a meeting. And I still get nervous sometimes going to some of those meetings after doing 20 years, and coming out of it. Did you feel like, I was just interested to see what your emotions were like trying to manage that?
Yeah, I think it was interesting. You always wonder, what they're thinking, and obviously preparing to go into a meeting, we can see the performance, and we can see, as you say, the couple of $100,000 negative, and the client's obviously privy to that as well. So you sort of do work up this, I suppose it's emotion in yourself, going, what are they going to say? But as soon as you get into that meeting, and as Nick says, you have that material, and you've got the knowledge and the communication and the data to support the philosophy. They're completely understanding of that, and they walk out of there probably happier than they've ever been during a positive market, because they realise the value in that relationship during these more volatile times, I think.
Yeah, I would much agree. I think going back to that point I was making earlier, I think in times like this we've almost been able to express the underlying investment philosophy in a more detailed way, and I think, as you said, Josh, I think that's actually provided probably more comfort than we would have previously thought in some situations. Obviously, there is some situations where clients have been a little bit caught up in the numbers, but that's only natural. Every client's going to react differently. But as you said, Josh, kind of understanding the differences in the situations and being well equipped to sort of deal with wherever the conversation goes.
Yeah, and how do you think the clients have coped overall? I mean, obviously everyone's a bit different, but do you think, as a generalisation, do you think it's sort of been they're just hanging in there and hoping that this all ends, or they appear quite comfortable?
I think there's two sides of it. I know Nick and I were just discussing earlier when we weren't preparing for the podcast that it was sort of a bit of radio silence at the beginning there. It was a bit sort of like, is anyone watching the news, or are they turning on the TV at night? Are they seeing what's happening? Because the phone wasn't really off the hook. But we got to a point, obviously, a few calls started coming through as the volatility continued throughout the year. But overall, I think only maybe 10% of the client base have really had to have that coaching, calls a few times a week or whatever it may be to get them through this period. But overall, I think the clients have handled it pretty well, and a few of them have actually seen it as a buying opportunity and taking that opportunity as it is. So I think, every client's different, but I think there's been a range of responses to this type of market. But overall, I think, because they've all been educated and been on the journey, most of them for so many years now, they've been able to really ride this short-term volatility without much hand-holding.
Yeah, and I think a big part of that, which we definitely felt that sort of silence at the beginning of when the market downturn started. But I think a big part of that probably stems back to us being proactive in making those communications being sent to them as opposed to us coming to them for them. Obviously, Nigel, you've always done a lot of work with the videos and other various sort of client updates and emails and sending out blogs. And I think potentially that might have caused a little bit of that silence as well, because they were already finding so much comfort in those pieces of material that not all of them anyways, were needing to sort of reach out and call up and sort of have the discussions that they were actually getting from the material we're providing.
Yeah, good. I mean, I think we do get a lot of good feedback around those the updates. Often, I think we could maybe even do more, but they seem pretty comfortable with those messages. And is there anything that I suppose, what you've seen particularly worked with client meetings, and perhaps what doesn't work, from the last year that is probably relevant in all situations, but particularly in what's been a pretty volatile year?
The data and the materials that you prepare for these meetings, I think, has been the most valuable piece. And I think it's not essays, it's more visual data. It's PowerPoint presentations that you can sit down there with a client face to face and talk them through it in a visual format that's easy for them to digest and easy for them to understand, because a lot of these concepts can be quite complicated. So preparing it in a format that's easy for them to digest and understand, I think has been very important. And I think that's been the most valuable tool. And to date, from our client base, we've had a few of these meetings where clients have said, well, what do we do? Interest rates are at 4% now. Why don't I just jump out straight into cash and then we'll just all, put it all into term deposits? But no one's actually gone forward with that, because once they see the data, they see the philosophy, and it's presented in a visual way for them that they can understand. I think that's been the most powerful tool so far.
Yeah, and I think I think with all those materials we've prepared, as with our underlying investment philosophy, we're always focusing on historical data. We're never sitting there in meetings saying, this is what's going to happen, this is what we think is going to happen. We're always coming back to the historical data and kind of communicating that we have been here before. And we were only here, obviously, for a different type of downturn, but we were only in a downturn a few years ago, and then it was only a few years before that. And kind of reiterating that, this is just a sort of same story, different time, and we've been here before and we'll get through it again. And I think, much to your point, Josh, having those illustrations of that historical data and specifically how markets have recovered in different periods and after different types of different market downturns, I think they've found a lot of comfort in that.
Yeah, I think it comes back to, COVID seems so far long ago when it was only really 12 months ago, but sometimes people's history and memory is a bit short. So just reminding them that, and as Nick says, this is not the first time. We've had 2 world wars, we've had the global financial crisis, all these events historically, and over time we've always bounced back. And I think once clients are remembered of that simple fact, they take a lot of comfort with that.
I suppose at any point in time where you thought, hey, maybe we're off track, maybe we should be doing something differently? Bonds were a big challenge, particularly at the start of the year, and didn't get much easier. Crypto, we were staying with a very, very strict philosophy where we avoid new things like that. Was there any point in time where, you thought, hey, maybe we are missing out on something here, maybe we should be getting this out of portfolios, or we should be looking somewhere else? Or
yeah, I suppose it's always easy to sort of second guess yourself a little bit, especially when bonds are down, as much as they were. That's never an easy one to swallow. But I think over time, as much as those doubts might creep in here and there, I think over time those sort of doubts kind of answer themselves. And I think that's what we've really seen in the last couple of months. There's obviously that period there where, yeah, sure, you kind of think, should we've got out of bonds? But obviously, as with our investment committee, a few of the listeners might have known, we have Dr. Steve Garth, who comes in and sort of reiterates some of our investment philosophy with us. And yeah, really coming back to that, if we just stay disciplined, the market will, and our underlying investment philosophy will reward us. And that's what we have seen over the last couple of months. The market's really bounced back, and our investors have really sort of reaped the benefits of that coming back.
Yeah, I think you're right, Nick. In terms of, we probably neglected to mention in this podcast so far, but this whole challenge in the last year has been the fact that, sure, equities are down, but bonds are down as well. And they're not down by a couple of percent. They're down by, global bonds are down more than 10%. So we've had that unique challenge as well this year. And, it's what happened only 5 times since the early 1930s where they've both been down together, and never to this magnitude. So that's been quite a challenge in itself, but we've been able to communicate quite effectively, the rarity and the uniqueness of this situation. And I think that's been really good for us personally as well, given it was such a unique situation. But yeah, it's been good.
Yeah, it doesn't get too much more challenging when you've got all asset classes down at once. Like it's tough enough when you might just have one sector down, but to have it all heading south and a long way south, like minus under 10% is a big drop for in any day of the week, but for every asset class. So certainly was a tough one, and there were, certainly in the middle of the year there it was pretty tough going. You've obviously learned a lot this year. It's a constant learning process about managing money and how to relate that back to clients. One thing we lean on a lot is coming back to our investment philosophy. So I thought if you just want to share a little bit about how we manage that. Like it's a very strong philosophy, but how do we keep that in check, and how do we internally keep that in check? Because our emotions can get in the way as well. Like the last thing we want is wavering from that and then ruining the whole story for clients by suddenly, what, we're just gonna dive into some, obscure investment, and that just ruins it almost in 1 second. So how do we manage that internally? How do we process that? How do we decide about different investments and manage, particularly in a year like this year, manage these that process in what's been probably one of the most challenging years.
I think the main thing, the most important thing is to stay educated. And to your question earlier is, constantly look for alternatives, which we have been doing. So we're not just naive to the fact, or we don't have the blinkers on saying our philosophy is the only philosophy. We are exploring those alternatives, but when we're exploring those alternatives, we're benchmarking it to our philosophy, and we're benchmarking it to the data that we currently have and are using, and saying, right, is this going to deliver more value to the client at the end of the day? And when we compare the data, we just come and we always circle back to the same conclusion: is no, it's not. So why would we go down that route when our philosophy is providing the same value, if not more value, than the alternatives? So I think it's staying educated, but also not having the blinkers on, exploring alternatives, but doing your research and comparing those alternatives to the current strategy.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, Josh, I think it's funny because, as you mentioned, Josh, there's that education piece for us, and we actually place a lot of emphasis onto our clients as well, trying to educate them about our investment philosophy. And, a big part of that is the three things that we always kind of emphasize, whether you're a new client coming through or your existing client, will always return to these principles, and that's managing your emotions, focusing on what you can control, and remaining disciplined. And really, over the last period, we've seen all of those three. Which we have done, we've satisfied all of those sort of criteria. But getting it towards the end of sort of a challenging period, we can really see where those three values are really, really important. Going back to just remaining disciplined, if we're talking about from a portfolio sense, we've been meeting with clients over the last couple of weeks that, after this entire year of lots of noise in the media, market downturn, they're down a couple % for the year. If you were to think, go back 3 months ago where the market was at its lowest, there's all this noise in the media, to think that you'd be sitting coming into the end of the year down 1% to 2%. It's pretty remarkable, really, and that really comes back down to that sort of principle of remaining disciplined, not varying from your approach. We're investing for the long term. We're not investing for tomorrow.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think it's important for for clients to know that as well. That's a very disciplined approach. If we lose our discipline, then it ruins the whole story. So, in a year like this year, where you've just got to stick to that, stick to that what we can control. Always lean back on that data and the research, but we've got an open mind. I mean, there's always things out there we don't know, and we're happy to look at that. But it's got to come back to, does it make sense for clients, and is it going to add value for clients? And it's a pretty strict process for anything to change that philosophy. Yeah. Well, that's been really good, guys. As always, I gave you a lot of time to prep, so you've done really well. Thanks for that. Is there any final comments? Anything else you wanted to add before we sign off?
Look, I think just from an overall year perspective, I've been in the industry for a bit over 2.5 years now with Josh and yourself, Nigel, and as you touched on at the beginning, Josh, we've seen so many different market conditions over the last couple of years, and we barely even touched into crypto today, but there's obviously that sort of part where that boomed and which things happened to that. So there's so many different avenues of conversation, but I think it's just been from an education perspective. I think it's been good to see the sort of very different marketing conditions over the last couple of years to sort of, equip us with the sort of skill set of conversations that we can hopefully carry forward.
Yeah, I think it's been a very long 2.5 years in a lot of ways, being the middle of COVID, but the different market events that we've witnessed, be it a massive bull market, a massive bear market, but also that crypto space that's just come in between there, just absolutely out of nowhere and blindsided everyone. Really, it's tested a lot of people and the discipline, but I think it reaffirms a lot of the philosophy in what we do, and I think that just gives a better story for when we talk to clients, and more evidence to robust our philosophy in our conversations, and to communicate them why we do what we do.
Well, that's great. Well, thanks for all your hard work, but also the fact that you've come in and you've been willing enough to challenge these processes as well, which is exactly what it needs. These things need to be questioned and challenged along the way. I'm not going to promise it gets any easier from here. I can't forecast what markets look like in the first couple of years, but you'd expect after a couple of tough years it might be a bit calmer. But who knows? You're in good stead now. You've managed to get through some of the toughest years in the last 30, 40 years. So at least you're ready for whatever comes. All right. Well, thanks, Nick. Thanks, Josh. That's awesome. I think everyone will enjoy hearing your side of the story and your experience. And I appreciate you being interviewed.
You've been listening to The Future Financial Advisor. So if you've been enjoying the show, please make sure to share it with your network and leave a review on your favourite listening platform. Or if you've got some ideas or thoughts or would like to come on as a guest or know someone who would be a great guest, then please let me know. To learn more about Scientium, just go to our website, scientium.com.au, or look me up on LinkedIn. Look forward to speaking with you and see you on the next episode.